So look, just some housekeeping. Thanks everyone for joining. Today's session is to just try and deliver some value back to everyone that I know. I've constantly been hit by people, not hit in a bad way, but just hit with messages, DMs, hey, can you help me with this, help me with that? So I just thought it would be best to consolidate everything that I know that I've researched and put together regarding the new low-rise or low mid-rise housing reforms to just share it with you guys. In this call, there's going to be some professionals, so industry professionals. There'll be some consultants that I've worked with that I've invited, or working with that I've invited along as well. There'll be also some past students that I've mentored, and also some of the students that are part of the mentoring program that I used to work for as well, that have joined as well. So there's a range of experiences. So let's all be kind to each other. Let's not name and shame any bad or good consultants that we've worked with, because the aim of today is purely around low mid-rise housing and all the sort of details around that. So it was published back in 28th of Feb. So we've had a bit of time to absorb it, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions for people, or there's a lot of confusion. So hopefully today I can sort of clear up the mist for people and try and answer a few questions that you might have. So as I said, the session today will be purely about the forums, the low mid-rise housing reforms. It won't be about anything else. So I'm not going to go into detail around CDC controls or anything like that, but it's purely around the new reforms. It's to pretty much cover off all the important components that I feel a novice developer, but also an experienced developer should be aware of. It's, again, reflects my interpretation of the LMR rules. So as of today, and I'm hearing that there is still going to be some minor tweaks and changes coming along the road. So don't take this as gospel. Always try and do your own research. There's quite a bit here. I know a lot, but I don't know everything. So there might be questions that I can't answer tonight. So what I'll do is I'll take those questions and I'll circle back to you offline or to the group. I guess I'll just work that out after this, once I've clarified it with my town planner. So just some Zoom video conference etiquette. So if you've got a question to ask, raise your virtual hand. And when you've finished your question, please put down your virtual hand. If you don't know how to do that, I'm just trying to remember because it's been a while since I used Zoom. I think it's under React feature. Cool. And if you can just mute yourself during the presentation, and when you do have a question, just unmute, ask your question, then mute yourself back up again, just in case you've got any background noise. And you're probably going to have quite a few questions tonight. So what I propose is I've got around 16, 17 slides of detail. So rather than waiting till the end, I think it might be best to invite you all to ask questions at the end of each slide that I present, because your questions will then be specific to that topic on that slide, so we can get it done and dusted and then move on to the next component. You guys happy with that?
Yep.
Cool. And I'll answer people's questions in order that they raise their hands. Okay, I've got a few more stragglers coming through. All right, let's kick it off. So look, as I mentioned, this content just reflects my interpretation of the reforms. So as of today, again, it can't be relied upon as formal planning or architectural advice. So no part of this session constitutes anything like legal, professional, and I highly recommend that you always engage a qualified town planner, a qualified architect that understands these controls if you're looking at a specific site or looking at doing something on something that you might already own that you think falls within the LMR rules. The takeaway here is really just a learning opportunity to really understand the rules and do some deep analysis on it. Doesn't necessarily mean that a site that you have or are looking at falls within the LMR rules. Again, when we go through the slides, there are some technicalities that you need to sort of consider, and that's why it should be a case-by-case basis, and it's always best to engage your professionals. Any questions? let's kick it off. So, bit of background. So, majority of you know me, I spent about 20 years in insurance and finance, leading large call centers and also large project teams within the insurance industry. My wife and I have always been investing in property for the last 20 years. So, always had a passion. Roughly around 2016, I invested into two JVs as a silent partner into two separate projects. It had a combined value of about 20 million back then. So pretty sizable back in 2016. Look, I enjoyed myself through that process, just really observing the JV partner. So then I decided in 2020 with my wife that I'm going to become a property developer because I really enjoyed it, loved it. We know property, but we just didn't know how to create it. So I joined a course led by Rob Flux and the Property Developer Network back in 2020, just to educate myself and fill in the gaps that I had after my joint venture experience. After I completed that course, I started our development company called Lightform Property back in 2021. And most of you know me because I've mentored quite a few of you, or you've worked with me. I'm a detail-orientated guy, so you'll probably see today that there's quite a bit of detail and content. That's just the way I sort of know how to do things. I don't do things in halves. I'm always about the detail. So what I really enjoy is actually drowning myself in New South Wales legislation, council LEPs, DCPs. I actually really enjoy that. So I think today's content really add value for everyone. But look, it doesn't stop there. I always go into detail. Just recently for a builder, I had to do some CAD drawings of some modeling just to get things precise. So I dive into that as well. So I'm pretty much across a lot of detail on projects, and I just dive straight in and just get shit done. Currently, I've got 4 projects, sort of circa 50 million. And here's a picture of me. So I'm not afraid to get dirty. I'll get on site and get the job done if I need to. So I'm not just a sort of desktop developer. I'll definitely get in there and do some work if I need to. Let's jump in. So look, the LMR refers to low mid-rise housing. It's a policy that the state government introduced on the 28th of February, and it's particularly around 171 listed locations. And those locations can be found on the New South Wales Department of Planning website. And I've got all the hyperlinks saved in this presentation at the end. So when I do share the PDF, you can access all the information that I've sourced it from. What it means is there's town centres, which they've identified. There's train stations they've identified, metro stations that they've identified, and light rail stations or light rail platforms that they've identified. The key here is to really encourage more development and more diverse development within this 800-metre ring. And it's to encourage development, particularly from dual occupancies, from multi-res townhouses to terrace houses, to residential flat buildings, to shop top housing, only in R1, R2, R3, and R4 residential zones. So if there is a property that might be classed as E1, like an economical zone, or it might be classed as a commercial area that's within the 800-metre ring or the physical actual town centre itself that we can see in this example, they're excluded from these reforms. It's only residential zones, R1, R2, R3, and R4. So what they've done is they've set some minimum standards, which we'll go into in the slides going forward. And if you can meet those minimum standards at a state level under the Housing SEPP code, well, then that's step 1 for qualification. But then there's another step, and we'll get into that too. So I'll just pause there. Any questions? Hands up if there's any questions. How do I pronounce that? Is it Mario? I'm hopeless.
That'll do. It's actually me, Cassandra, actually asking the question. Hey, thanks for doing this, Cihan. I've read there was something that came out in July last year where they allowed duplexes all over New South Wales. Is that superseded by these
new reforms?
These new reforms.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
So They did have a separate chapter, which they released in mid-July last year. And it appears that that chapter in the Housing SEPP has been removed, and it's made its way into this new chapter 6, which is under LMR. But regarding dual-locks, you can still do a dual-lock if it's permitted in that particular council. You can still do it in an LMR zone. If you want to use the CDC controls, and I'll get into that a bit later, it would mean that you need to comply with the code SEPP for CDC. So the minimum lot size and the frontages for a CDC pathway, if you want to do it in an LMR area. But if you were to do a dual-lock under the LMR rules and go through a DA application, well, then the set of standards that they've set will then apply.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stan.
How you going? I read something about 400 meters around stations. Is that similar to what we're talking about here today? There was something about 400 meters. I just remember reading off somewhere.
So in this illustration, you can see that there's two zones, and I'm going to jump into that. So you've got a 400 illustration, and then you've got an 800 illustration in this diagram. So there are different controls for 0 to 400, and then there are a different set of controls from 400 to 800. So we'll jump into that in a minute. Rex?
Thanks, Cihan. Just a really quick question, just following on from Cassie's question, really, and it's something I've been wanting to ask, but it's just really confusing. So does that mean if you've got a piece of land that's not in the LMR zone, but now are we saying that under the SEPP, you'd be able to put a duplex? Because I've got these zones called foreshore protection areas, and you need 1,000 square meters there. And I guess the question is really, does that mean if it's 450 with 12-meter frontage, and let me know if that's not a question you want to answer, but is that what it means? Because the council mandates you need 1,000 square meters. And now if that is in the SEPP, that means technically you'd be able to get it even if it's not in the LMR zone. Is that what it means?
No.
No, okay.
If you're outside of the LMR zone, you can't use the controls that they've set for within the LMR zone.
Yeah, cool. Okay,
cool. All right, let's jump forward. So to go back to answering the second part of, I think, Stan's question. So they've defined, there's definitions. So LMR walking distance. So in the SEPP, they call the inner area, which is 0 to 400. And then they've got the outer area, 400 to 800. So what they're saying is that you need to demonstrate that you can walk within 0 to 400 to a public entrance to a railway or metro, or to a platform of a light rail station, or to a town centre edge. If you can demonstrate that, well, then there are separate controls for 0 to 400 and 400 to 800. The 0 to 400 is a lot more generous because it gives you extra floor space, extra height, because you're closer to that activity area. And as you sort of sprawl out, the 400 to 800, the heights get lower and the FSR gets lower as well. But the permissibility is still the same. And we'll get into that level of detail in the further slides. What I've demonstrated here, and this is using the LMR spatial viewer, which they've shared publicly on the Department of Planning's website. I've measured here, and you can see that the yellow shaded overlay, I've measured exactly 800 meters to the edge of that shading to the station entrance. So this mapping is, I would say, 99% there, spot on. But again, it's up to you to demonstrate to the consent authority, and the consent authority being council, that your site that you're making the application for falls within either the 400 or 800. Now, if your site is really like, I would say, on a nice edge, and you're trying to push the extra density of the 400 or the extra density of being in the LMR for the 800, I feel that councils are going to require you to potentially have a traffic consultant measure it with a trundle wheel and sign off on it. You'll probably need to get it surveyed by a surveyor. At the moment, it's just untested, so I haven't had any knowledge or any experience just yet on what councils are going to do in this space, or whether the council's traffic controllers are actually going to go out there themselves and measure it if you're literally right on the edge of it. If you're well within, well, it won't be an issue because they're saying that if you just demonstrate it on a map like this, using a spatial viewer, and you're within 600, you're pretty much in the zone. But if you're right on the edges, that's when you might get a bit of pushback from council, or you might get a bit of challenge. I'll pause there. Any questions? No questions. I've done a good job.
Hey,
Cool.
hey, question.
Yes.
Hey, Gian, I think it comes down to council's attitude too, right? Some are more pro than the others, aren't they? So,
So
so
you've
what's your
touched
thoughts
on,
on that?
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, just want to know your thoughts on that. I mean, some will stick a knife in your head just to not to do anything.
So I went to a session with a prominent Eastern Suburbs town planner that presented, and our fellow colleague Jo was there as well. She's on the call, I can see. We bumped into each other there. Now, this particular town planner said that councils aren't ready for this, nor do they have enough staff to be able to actually really interpret some of the grey areas of these rules. So he feels that there's going to be quite a few sort of land environment cases at the beginning. And then once there's some precedents set and really good understanding, I think it'll be sort of smooth flowing from there. He also mentioned that, and you probably guys already know this, that councils are already being monitored on their performance on DA approvals. So the state government is really monitoring this. And if they see that there's quite a few applications put through to the planning portal, but the response times are really slow from council and they're dragging out, there's a gut feeling from this town planner that they're going to put pressure on these councils. They're going to say, well, you're too slow. We have an agenda here we need to deliver on. Therefore, we're going to put pressure on you. Otherwise, we're going to take the whole planning process and approval process out of your control, and we're going to run with this. So there's that risk. So it's untested. We might have some councils that push back on it, but also some councils that might support it because they need the extra density, they need the extra ratepayers. And this is a way to tell their constituents, hey, this was done to us. The state government passed their agenda. We didn't want it, but we have to comply to it. But secretly, they want the extra ratepayers because they're struggling. And you can see in the Northern Beaches, for example, I think it was, or one of the local councils, they like double their rates in a year. So councils are feeling pressure. HT. You got a question?
Yeah, I do. Hi, Jan. Thanks for presentation. It's great. I
This is
actually
Henny.
that's me. Yep,
Yes, I can recognize the voice.
that's good, mate. I think I attended the same presentation you're talking about, and we start seeing some council resisting. Just early time resisting this type of using the LMR, especially in further council from the city where they have a bigger land. They start resisting a little bit toward the western suburb.
Yeah, and look,
Yeah.
I'm going to go into a bit of that detail. It's a good
But
point out.
yeah, but I just want to ask you, Jan, is the active map somewhere where you can put the address and it can tell you whether this property is under the LMR or not?
Yes, that is the New South Wales LMR spatial viewer.
Yep. Okay.
So if you Google it, LMR spatial viewer, Department of Planning,
Yeah.
you can then physically punch in the address. It will highlight the address. And if you can see my screen, this image is actually from that spatial viewer.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
it's got the measuring tool on there.
Yep.
Other platforms now, like Landchecker, have now started to put the overlay on there as well. And they've got up-to-date satellite mapping sort of every 3 months, depending on the locations that you're in. And you can really zoom in high quality and measure it precisely on the footpaths and the crossing markers and everything. And that's what I've been doing.
Sure. Of course. Thank you.
Cool. I'll go over to the next slide. So in the code SEPP under Schedule 10, there's a definition of what does walking distance mean. So this is what they're measuring the LMR walking distance. So they're saying that the distance needs to be between 2 points measured along a route that may be safely walked by a pedestrian using as far as reasonably practical public footpaths and pedestrian crossings. So you can see in this image here, sorry guys, if you can just go on mute, there's some feedback. I'll just mute everyone. You can see in this image here, I've located a town center and I've picked it up right from the edge because the definition says from the edge of a town center, and I've safely walked, and you can see that I've indented the walk a little when it's at a T intersection or a crossroad because that's where the crossing footpath was. And I've then reached it out to 400 meters and I was able to touch one property right down the bottom of the map. So in this instance, and in this example, it's likely that that property, because the boundary touches the 400, council, again, it's council discretion always, that this is likely to fall within the 400 meters for that extra density. And this is just an example of how precise they're likely to be and put us under with scrutiny on the exact measurements and to demonstrate walkability. You can do it quite well in the LMR tool, but the satellite image here can probably be dated and maybe there's new paths. So what you'll probably best do is, with your relevant consultant, get access to the latest satellite imagery like Metro Maps or Near Maps or Land Checker, where you can demonstrate the date of the map, the satellite image, and really zoom in high quality and measure it precisely along a walkway. Now, you can also be very strategic in the way that you measure it by the angles that you choose. So you can tighten up your turning radiuses and your angles. And I suggest that you do that just to get that extra meter or two of compliance if you need to. So again, it says public footpaths, pedestrian crossings, and it needs to be safe. Now, there are some suburbs in Sydney that don't have footpaths, but they've got these big, wide nature strip that council owns in front of your property. I'm told that that's considered a safe, walkable pathway because on both sides of the road, there's no footpaths. If there was a footpath on one side of the road and you're on the opposite, you need to demonstrate that you've got to walk over safely to that footpath and then walk along the footpath. But if there's no footpaths on either side of the property and the council has a large chunk of land there, which is council owned, where they've got generally their nice big street trees, you are allowed to walk on that safely. It just means that it doesn't have a concrete footpath. And if you can walk safely to the precincts or to a town centre or a train station, then you're considered technically in. So again, it's a bit grey. Councils are likely to test it and push back. If you're well within, it won't be an issue. But when you're getting really tight on meters, just really be careful. Don't go jump onto a site and purchase a site because you think it's in. You just got to really measure it and do your due diligence with the right professionals. Any questions?
Quick question.
Rex.
If the station happens to be adjacent to a nature reserve, and I don't know if this is tested or not, but I thought I'll ask anyway. And it's not on the mapping tool, these locations, because if you can imagine this, there's a station that they've listed in the schedule, but the reserve butts onto the station. And I guess the question is, in that scenario, extrapolating what you described, you would technically be able to include it if it's within the 800 meter, if you can walk the alternative route.
So this LMR spatial viewer with the yellow highlight overlay,
yeah,
the state government calls it indicative.
Yeah.
Because new pathways over time can open up.
Yes.
Councils may open up a pathway on a reserve or create a new recreational park for kids, and that's a safe walking trail, and it could cut down the distance of walk. Again, it's a little grey. They've left it open. That's why they called it indicative spatial viewer.
Right.
Because through future development, there's likely going to be new footpaths or new walkways opening up. Again, it's you to monitor this and then display to council, here is the safe walkable route and you've demonstrated that to them.
Okay. Done.
Cool. We'll jump over to the next one. There's no more questions. So there's quite a bit of detail here, and I've summarized it in the table. So before I jump into the detail of the table, I'll just give you a quick rundown and overview. So these are the LMR area non-discretionary, non-refusal standards that are now embedded into the Housing SEPP 2021. So these will override those restrictive LEP and DCP controls. So if your proposed development complies with what I call this is step one, these controls set at the state level, then council can't refuse you on these grounds. If you meet these controls and don't ask for any variations, you'll pass step one. Now, the consent authority obviously is the council. So you have to lodge your development application through the development portal and through council, and they'll be the consent authority approving it, not a private certifier. So when it comes to, and there was a question earlier around the complied development code with the low-rise housing diversity, it can't be used, those controls within, it can't be used, the development, the CDC fast track pathway can't be used with a private certifier if you want to use the LMR rules within an LMR area. You have to use your traditional CDC rules based on that code if you wanted to develop under CDC and get the fast track process. So again, you're still permitted to use the CDC pathway, but you're going to have to adhere to those strict, rigid rules. And it's a tick and flick. So if you don't meet those controls, well, the private certifier won't tick it off as approved. Whereas sometimes there's a little bit of leeway with council where you can seek variations under, I think, clause 4.6 under the LEP for the local government, where if you're a little bit short on something or aren't exactly complying with something, but you can show enough merit, they'll likely consider it as part of the application. So I have heard there's a bit of noise out there, and I've read through some posts and some videos that I've watched that people are saying that specific local environment plans in some councils have some minor gaps or little loopholes, which might permit CDC terrace housing as a fast track using the LMR rules. Again, it's untested. I don't know whether it's true or not. I am going to ask my town planner to look into it. But because it's untested and I think it's might be a little loophole in some LEPs, once councils catch on, I reckon councils are going to close that loophole. So if anyone's throwing out little gold nuggets here and there, just be wary of it. You still need a private certifier to feel comfortable with that little loophole and sign off on it. So then you have to find the private certifier that's willing to take that risk with you, putting their license on the line or even being challenged through court by the local council. Because when you lodge a CDC, council or any of the neighbours will get a notification and they've got up to 3 months to lodge an objection. So I reckon councils are going to be really scrutinising everything that comes through in these LMR areas. And if somebody's trying to pass the CDC through using the LMR rules, I feel like they might make an example of some people. So just be careful. Look, I always say be patient, lodge a DA. Most councils are good to deal with and work with. And I feel that now that this legislation has been passed, you're going to get some pushback and some resistance. But if you can provide the right outcome that adds to the character of the area and that you're not pushing the boundaries on a lot of variations, I feel like councils are going to start to adapt slowly and then it'll just become the norm to them. So it's just teething issues at the beginning. I always say go to a pre-lodgement with some initial concepts and really test it with them and demonstrate the design, what you're trying to achieve. For the $600 or $800 that you need to pay for that meeting, you can often get a really good feel from council. And particularly with LMR, I feel like, and I would recommend that you engage your consultants, come up with some initial sketches, demonstrate to them that this is what our intent is early on, so they know and they're prepared of what's to come. and then just try and meet the controls. Don't try and push it too much. And if you are pushing it, provide the right justification. And if you've got a really good architect, they'll be able to demonstrate good arguments as to why you're trying to vary the controls and what benefit and value that it adds to the community. Now, as I mentioned, the low-rise housing is applicable to R1, R2, and R3 within that 800-meter ring. When we're looking at the applicable controls, they're going to be applicable on dual occupancies. So we've got 2 dwellings on one lot. They've got multi-dwelling housing, so 3 lots on one title, or sorry, on one lot. What that means is generally those townhouse style, I guess, buildings where you've got a gun barrel driveway along one side, and you've got townhouses facing that driveway along the side of a boundary. And then you've got the other typology of terraces, so multi-dwelling terraces. Terraces are, just like in Surrey Hills, Darlinghurst, houses that face a street, where the front door faces the street and has direct access to the street. The difference between the traditional townhouse and a terrace, obviously, is that the multi-res townhouses don't all face a street. They're likely to face a communal driveway, whereas the terraces have direct street access. The beauty about the direct street access with terraces is under the LMR, they're going to allow Torrens title subdivision, and you need a minimum of 165 square meters per lot with a minimum of 6 meters width. So what that means is if you're doing terraces, and I think quite a few of you are looking at it, you'll be able to do a terrace on 18-meter frontage. But the thing is, you got to ask yourself, well, if I have to put side setbacks, and a side setback is anywhere from 90 centimeters to 1.5, well, what are the end terraces going to look like? They're going to be like 5.1 meters. That's to the edge of the brick. So imagine you've got internal walls. You're eating into that space because your middle one always has to be 6 meters in width. It's your end ones that you're going to sacrifice because you're trying to be, and I'll use this word, a cheapskate, trying to find exactly 18 meters. So then the outcome that you're going to be producing is just going to be crap. So really think about the product that you're trying to create rather than trying to chase the smallest frontage. It might mean that to create really nice homes that are 6 meters in width equal, that you're likely going to want to try and find something that's 20 meters minimum frontage. So just really think about that. Just because it says you can doesn't mean sometimes you should, because the products that you might create might not be desirable for the area, and then you might shoot yourself in the foot because you can't get anyone to buy it. The multi-res townhouses, unfortunately, you can't Torrens title, so they're likely going to be strata title only. So again, just really think about the product that you're creating in an area, whether there's going to be demand for that type of product. And obviously, Dulox, we're pretty familiar with because of CDC rules, pretty straightforward. The only difference here between CDC and LMR that I can see is that the minimum frontage has dropped from 15 to 12 in an LMR area. So again, really way up. If I go get a 12-meter site and I put a duplex on it, I'm going to have at a minimum 90 centimeter setbacks. So then you're going to have 5.1 meters from brick to brick. So when you put your internal walls, you're probably going to have, 4.7 roughly. If you're skimping and doing, let's say, a brick veneer and you've got your timber frames, you have roughly 4.7. In my opinion, it's not really good usable space. But again, I'll leave it up to you guys to decide when you're looking at sites. Question time. Malika.
Hey, Cihan, thanks so much for this. Question on the definition of +3 for both the multi-dwelling and the terrace. Is that just 3? And is there any kind of pro-ratering if you've got like a 900-meter block, for example? So your minimum lot sizes can fit more. Does that mean that you can do more than 3, or is it just 3?
So the definition under the SEPP of multi-dwelling is anything 3 or more.
So as long as your minimum lot size, as long as it's 1.65, you can do as many as you like within.
Correct. So if you've got enough frontage for terraces, then you can build as many 165 square meter lots as you can stretch them out as far as you can, depending on your frontage. But each terrace needs to be a minimum of 6 meters.
Great. And so for the
Multi-dwelling,
so I'm just thinking because there's no minimum lot size there, how would that work?
there is a minimum lot size for multi-dwelling,
So,
so that's 600 square meters, but the frontage is 12 meters. So they say that with a minimum frontage of 12 meters, generally a gun barrel driveway is around 3 or 3.5 meters, probably more like 4 meters, because sometimes they want a 3-meter driveway and they want some sort of nature on the side of it and some nature closest to the house as well as you're driving down. So let's just call it 4 meters. So then that means you only have 8 meters of width going down the site to build these multi-res. So imagine if you're going to put a backyard and they're all facing one side of the boundary, you're not going to really create a desirable product because they're probably going to be little shoeboxes. So it comes back down to that rule. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I guess you really have to weigh up how small and ugly my box is going to be. Am I going to provide any sort of space at the rear? How am I going to achieve private open space if council dictate under the DCP, because there is a relationship to DCP as well. If council say your private open space needs to be a minimum of 2x2 or 3x3, how do you achieve that if you've only got like 8 meters to use to build a house and achieve private open space?
Excellent, thanks.
Stan.
Similar question to what Malika was saying, but it's more regards to if we had like 2 lots or 3 lots to consolidate, do we have to go about and consolidate the 2 lots first and then determine how many 165 square meters we have for, like, say, terrace housing or something like that going across ways? So do we go, say, for example, we'll buy one lot at 300, another lot at 300, so that's 600 square meters. Do we need to go through a process for the council to consolidate that lot first into one and then qualify for this multi-dwelling housing terrace?
So because this is going through a DA pathway, not a CDC pathway, council will be the consent authority granting permission of lot consolidation to then meet the LMR rules. So it's part of the one application, from my understanding. Now, if you're doing a CDC outside of LMR, the lots need to be consolidated first, my understanding is, to be able to then qualify to the minimum under CDC rules. But in this instance, because council is a consent authority, they grant the amalgamation as well as the LMR application.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense.
Cool. Who's next? Malika, do you have another question? Because your hand's still up. No, Thomas.
Thanks, Cihan. You know how with CDC there are restrictions such as, bushfire, flood, and heritage. What about for LMR? Is there such restrictions for those sort of criteria?
So I've got a full slide on all the restrictions. So if we can just hold the question till then.
Yep.
Cool.
Nice.
Hanny?
Yeah, Jihan, just a question. First a question, is this mean that if the council LEB doesn't stand with the LMR, none of the clauses of the current LEB will be assessed in when you put an application using LMR to council?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Can you repeat it?
Yep. The current LEB could have some controls or certain control about the driveways and so on. Does it stand when you submit an application under LMR, like using the control that he mentioned?
So I've got a slide on this. I'll quickly answer part of it. So these minimum standards that the state government set in the Housing SEPP is step 1 to qualify for a site in these LMR areas. As you can see, I don't know if you can see the screen, but there is no control that they've specified for, let's say, side setbacks or rear setbacks or driveway widths or private open space, because every council has their own DCP where they capture those particular controls. So this is step 1 If you qualify for the LMR controls, cool, that's tick 1, but you do still need a second tick because the relationship then goes back to council's DCP controls because they've got minimum standards for the character that they want in the area.
Got you.
So, and I'll get into that detail in a few slides, but you'll also need to adhere to those DCP controls, or you need to put an application to vary those controls and seek, I guess, some forgiveness.
Variation. Yep. Got you.
Cool.
Perfect.
Luke Borg.
Hey, Cihan, quick question regarding consolidation of lots. If you had 2 lots side by side and one lot was within the 400-metre inner zone and the other lot was, say, 450 metres, so it would form part of the outer zone, what rules would apply when you're looking for permissibility and an uplift?
So good question. I actually heard this same question when I went to this town planning forum in the eastern suburbs, and the town planner answered this physical question, but again, I would get it qualified. He said, if you've got one lot that falls within, but the next door neighbor that you're considering consolidating falls outside, unfortunately, that's outside and it won't be included, even if you do a lot consolidation.
Yeah, wow. Okay.
He was pretty black and white on that. But again, I would clarify it.
Awesome. Thanks, Cihan.
Joe.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Cihan. My question is, have you or someone you know done any calculations, say you're trying to build a medium quality product, looking at the minimum requirements for duplexes and townhouses? Have you done any calculation as to what you can actually get on those minimum blocks of lands that are required? Like, can you actually get anything, or you need to go bigger than that?
Sorry, can you ask the question again? Because I think it's referencing sort of building envelope.
Okay, so my question is, for example, looking at the dual occupancy, so minimum lot size 450, minimum frontage 12, or townhouses, multi-dwelling townhouses, minimum 600 square meters, minimum 12-meter frontage. If you were to get a block of land with those minimum sizes, what kind of product could you actually get to build? Like, would it be a good product, or would it be a shoebox and you need to go bigger?
Look, I was mentioning this earlier. I guess it's based on your research. So there might be areas where traditionally they're always 12-meter lots everywhere. So let's say Inner West, for example, they're all quite narrow and people are comfortable living in narrow lots. So if you've got a 12-meter site and you build a duplex on it with 450 square meters, it might be acceptable in that area to build a small product on that. But
okay,
again,
so you mean like in Leichhardt or Balmain or somewhere like that, right?
Yeah, I say it's area specific.
Yeah.
So
okay.
if I was going to go out to, let's say, Ryde Council, where, the frontages are always like 15 plus 16, 17, 18, I wouldn't be going hunting around for a 12-meter just to do it on a 12-meter and try and save myself some money. Because if other developers around you are building it in 15, 16, 17, like you said, they're probably going to create a better product. The space is more usable. You're not restrictive on the design, and they're likely going to get a better outcome. So then you might shoot yourself in the foot on resale time.
Yeah.
I guess it's down to the architect or the designer on what usable floor space they can really get out of a site with 12 meters. As I mentioned earlier, if you got 12 meters and you have to do a 90 centimeter setback on each side, then that really only gives you 10.2 meters. When you cut it up in half, that's 5.1. If you do a double brick party wall is 270 millimeters or 27 centimeters. Then you have to put a timber frame on that. A timber frame is what? I think 11. Put some gyprock, another sort of 1 or 2 centimeters. You're really not leaving yourself enough space. And then you've got your brick veneer wall on the side boundary. Then you're going to have a timber frame there. So you're really squeezing and condensing down the gyprock to gyprock internal space. So you might end up with something that's really small, and it might be quite long when you're doing the design. So you definitely can't fit 2 side-by-side bedrooms on something
Yeah.
that wide, because a standard bedroom is around 3 meters.
Correct.
So generally, to fit two standard side-by-side bedrooms upstairs to try and save on linear meters on buildable area, you would need at least minimum sort of 16 meters to be able to squeeze on the upper level 2 bedrooms side by side.
Mhm.
So if you're narrow, that means your building is just going to really stretch out, and builders charge quite a lot of money when you're building in linear meters, when you're dragging it out to the rear of the property. If you can condense more, then your linear meters are smaller and your buildable, I guess, cost is going to be a little bit lower, because you're really maximizing on usable space. You don't have wasted corridors trying to get to the rear of the building. You don't have these unnecessary voids and so forth. You're really compacting it in. So again, it's just down to the type of product you're trying to cater for the area.
Okay. And one more question, sorry, just looking at this table just dawned on me. So with a maximum building height of 9.5 meters, does that mean you could have some room in the attic? So another bedroom or living room in the attic space?
Yes, do you see how they haven't gone specific? So in the next controls in residential flat buildings, they have said maximum of 4 or 6 stories, but here they haven't specified the stories. They just said that you can go up to 9.5. So you could possibly fit a 3-story, or like an attic, like you're suggesting, or a roof space, or maybe, I don't know, a sky deck on the roof, whatever you want to call it, observation deck.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Tinker?
Let me just unmute myself. So I have 2 questions. One question is actually sometimes when I actually looking at the LMR indicative map, there are some like houses which is on the edge of the area. But when you actually look at it, it's only partial of the house that actually fall into the area. So would that be properties safely saying, yes, they are within the 800, like 400 to 800?
So I heard a town planner speak about this, and I have also spoken to another town planner to get an opinion, and both of them are the same opinion. If you can demonstrate that 1% of your land falls within, and you can walk within that 800 meters, then you're technically in. So if it just touches a part of your property or just skims a part of your lot boundary, and you can demonstrate that from walking from the edge of your boundary line to the distance that you need to measure to, then you're technically in.
Okay, got it. So the second question, right? So when we're actually looking for lots, is there like a rule of thumb or some, because when you actually consider like a lot probably is not really good for terraces, but then maybe yes, actually could be a pretty good one for townhouses. Is there like when you're actually looking at those kind of opportunity, do you have to look in those lots one by one for 2 sets of standards? Or is there something you can roughly say, okay, that's going to be no good for townhouse, that's going to be no good for terraces,
Well,
or we had to go through twice for both the standards?
Well, you can see on this table here, these rules are R2, R3, and R4. So if you feel that all the lots in the area are all, let's say, 15 meters on average, and they're 600 meters, then you might lean towards multi-dwelling townhouses in the middle column because it passes the minimum of 12 meters. But it's not enough to build terraces because you need a minimum of 18. So the decision is yours. I guess when you're looking at an area, where do you sort of lean towards? I can't sort of say what is best. It's really around understanding what the market dynamics are in the area and what people are likely to accept. Now, you have to understand that these are new reforms. Some of these areas have never had this type of development before. So you're probably going to be a pioneer. Or you could wait a year or 2 for other people to do it, to demonstrate some evidence, go through council, or you can get in early. And if you can meet the rules and you want to test the market and you feel confident that there are other types of comparables that are close to the product that you're going to create, as long as you can demonstrate a comp, I would say sometimes you just got to go for it.
Thank you.
Malika.
Yeah, this is a perfect segue to the question I was going to ask, which is I've got Rob's, you don't want to be a pioneer thing ringing in my ears. Where there isn't comps, would you say, so I know North Shore areas where there's not many townhouses in some parts, would you be looking to like a unit potentially as the next closest thing, or how would you go about kind of guesstimating cooked product?
Look, I don't want to answer those types of questions or get into that specific. I want to focus purely on the reforms. I guess the only thing I can suggest is sometimes you have to be a pioneer. Sometimes you got to back yourself. Sometimes you have to sit on the sidelines and wait for other people to do it first to gather the evidence. Sorry, can somebody go on mute? Linda, there we go. We just muted her. We'll name and shame her. Yeah, look, I don't really want to comment there. I guess I can have an offline conversation with you on that. You just got to back yourself. If you're feeling confident about the product that you want to deliver to an area and you think that it fits within the strategic intent of this sort of LMR precincts, the 800 meters, and you feel that it's going to contribute to the area, and you feel that there's maybe a buyer for that type of product, it's maybe something that you just run with.
Okay, great.
Cool. Last question before we move on, Peter.
Yeah, g'day, mate. With the multi-res on one lot, 3 dwellings, 1 car space per dwelling, can the council come back and hit you with different stuff on the visitor parking to make it not feasible?
This goes into the slide that I'm going to go into a bit later around the relationship with council's DCP controls.
DCP,
so
yeah.
If you meet these minimum standards, you're a tick for step 1.
Yeah.
But you can see on this table that the state government hasn't specified anything about visitor parking. So then the relationship goes to, well, if I'm doing multi-res and the council has a DCP that states particular controls for that particular type of product that I'm creating called multi-res, it's likely there's going to be additional controls that you need to adhere to at that DCP level when you lodge your application.
Yeah, so I figured, yeah.
Cool. Just looking at the time, so there's quite a few pieces to go through, so I'll scroll through to the next one. Look, straightforward, very similar to the last slide. Residential flat buildings. So again, we're doing 3 apartments or more over 2 levels. They're permitting it in R1, R2, R3, and R4 locations. So they've got the inner area of 400 meters, and then they've got the outer area, the 400 to 800. The difference is the maximum floor space. So they're giving you extra floor space if you're within the 400. So you go up to 2.2 to 1 or 220% of the land size. So if you've got 1,000 square meters, you can go up to 2,200 square meters of buildable area, internal buildable area. If you're in the outer area, it goes down to 1.5. And the building height as well, it's higher in the 400 zone because you're closer to that economic zone or that train station. So they want the higher density there. And as you start to go to the 400 to 800, they just want it to flatten out a bit and start to get lower, because then naturally integrate into the 2-story houses that are generally around the R2 areas that sort of touch these precincts. So you got 22 meters in height versus 17.5 meters. If you are looking to do residential flat buildings in R1 and R2, a lot of councils, or historically old councils, they already permitted residential flat buildings in R1s, but it was never I've never seen it in an R2. So this is a bit of a first time. So they'll let you do residential flat buildings in an R2, but they are restricting the height to 9.5, similar to the dulocks and the terraces. The FSR does go up to 0.8 versus under a duloc, the FSR is 0.65, for example. So then you just have to really weigh up, well, what can I really get on? Let's say if I find a 500 square meter lot, I'll just calculate it. 500 square meters times 0.8, you got 400 square meters of internal. If you're going to build some nice, generous 2 bedrooms, maybe around that 90 square meter mark to 100 square meter mark, you're probably likely going to get only 4 apartments in there. And don't forget, you have to probably give up some space for corridors and so forth as well. So it's not exactly precise. So then you have to ask your question, well, just because it says you can doesn't mean should I do it? There might be some areas that you can possibly achieve it if you find a nice site, maybe larger than 500 square meters, and that you want to do like a nice sort of 2 or 3 level. But again, that's a choice that you guys will have to make. And as part of the new reforms, and I forgot to touch on this on the earlier slide, the state government has also released what they're calling a tree canopy design guide. So under the LMR areas, they want to encourage, I guess, more streetscape, more trees on individual lots, just to make it look, I guess, less concretey. So they've put some strict controls around what is the minimum deep soil and what is the minimum percentage of canopy cover across your site. So you'll need to adhere to those, and there's some minimum standards. And the next one is shop top housing. So similar to residential flat building, the difference being you can have some shops on the bottom, and then obviously you're going to have at least one apartment above to consider it a shop top housing. The controls are almost identical. So there's no minimum lot size, there's no minimum frontage, but the maximum height for the 400-meter precincts does just go up by 2 meters up to 24 meters. The previous slide had 22 meters. So I don't know if many of you are going to be doing shop top housing. I guess the majority of you will be looking at dulux, multi-res, and possibly residential flat buildings over time. Pretty straightforward. I'll move forward to the next one. So exclusions. So there was a question earlier around exclusions. So they've listed 9 exclusion categories. You can see them listed here. I won't go into detail on every individual one, but I'll touch on some key standouts. So if your property touches bushfire, even if it touches a millimeter of a bushfire buffer zone and it's on the maps, you can't do an LMR application on it. So that's a black and white. They've located, I guess, some floodplaining areas. Again, that's down at LGA level. So there'll be some standards around that. I haven't done a lot of detailed research on the floodplaining areas just yet. And if I do some research, I'll happily share it with everyone. But again, this is why I recommend speaking to consultants to really do the analysis for each council, because every council has specific flood controls. And I know that some of the councils, after a lot of the rain that we had in 2020, 21, 22, they've been updating their flood mapping. They're doing new studies, and they're forcing properties potentially that were never flood impacted to then be considered as possibly flood prone or in those 0 to sort of 100-year events. So just keep an eye out for that, because they are evolving over time. The 3 key points for me is heritage and conservation. So conservation isn't listed here as an exclusion. That's because you are permitted to do an LMR development in a conservation area. But the kicker is councils have a character for conservation that they want to achieve. So it might mean that they'll be very difficult and very pressing you on the character to fit within that conservation precinct. So in your design, sometimes if you're trying to push a residential flat building in a conservation area that never had residential flat buildings, and if you're the first one, you might get some resistance. Whether you get it approved or not, I don't know. So it's just something to be keeping an eye out for. Again, just because you can doesn't mean you're going to get it through. There are those loopholes, not loopholes, but barriers that we have to go through at the council DCP level. But if a property has a heritage item, it's a no-go. So I'm hearing that there's people in the North Shore, and there was a Today Tonight, I think, or one of those sort of documentary trusted news sources. They interviewed a bunch of owners in the North Shore, and there was this one owner who had heritage items or a heritage house. He couldn't be part of the consolidation that all his other neighbors were joining into. So he was going to be this one house trapped amongst 6 other houses in an LMR area, and he couldn't develop. So he was going to have these up to 6-story high-rise look into him, devaluing his land. So in that instance, I don't know how council's going to react. I've got a feeling that if somebody's locked in a U-shaped type of development and they're the only little house amongst all these big high-rises, I think councils might be sympathetic to those houses that might be isolated because they're the only one that have a heritage item on them. But again, it's untested and it's just something that we've got to keep an eye out for. The other ones that I'm concerned with is the high aircraft noise areas, and I'll get into a bit of that detail. And land within a 200 meters of a high pressure pipeline. So this was really intriguing when I was doing research into it, and I've got 2 dedicated slides on it. So before I jump into the 2 dedicated slides on the high aircraft noise area and the high pressure pipelines, do you have any questions? Sajeev.
Hi, Jihan. So the councils that you've got listed here, they are the only ones that are excluded. So there aren't any that who don't need to adhere to it now.
So these entire LGAs, Bathurst, Blue Mountains, Hawkesbury, and Wollondilly, there'll be no LMR in there.
But every other council must comply?
Every other council that has a town centre, a train station, a metro, or a light rail that is been earmarked must comply with LMR.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Rex.
Sorry, Zihan, I might have missed this. Did you say if it's bushfire land, even if it's a buffer zone, it's excluded? Is that your understanding?
Yes, because the buffer, if the buffer is touching into that property, it's considered excluded.
Okay.
That's my interpretation. Thomas.
Yeah, number 4, flood planning areas in 22 high-risk zones. Is that the one where you, in the ArchiStar, you put on the flood map and covers those blue area? Is that what this represents, or is that a different area to the ArchiStar? What that shows?
So look, there are a number of platforms like Landchecker, ArchiStar, other platforms that have flood mapping data. It's not always accurate because councils are refreshing it, and sometimes councils don't even share it until you do a 10.7 planning certificate on a site. Then you know whether a site is subject to flood planning or not. So it's something that you need to dig into and ask your specific council if they don't share the maps publicly, which a lot of them don't, some do. But if you ask their planning team, they should be able to give you latest flood study documents because it's public information and mapping. If they don't give it to you freely, you can put what's called a GIPA request, so a Freedom of Information request at the local government, and then they must release it to you. They may not give you copies, but you can go into their office and view them physically. Whether they let you make copies of it or not, I'm not sure.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Stan.
Yeah, it's just a TOD-orientated development. Is it because the government has highlighted even higher density in these areas and they don't want these smallest LMR developments happening there? So they want like massive developments going through there?
Yep, you've answered the question. So TOD's transport-orientated development, which they rolled out prior to LMRs, they identified all these strategic train stations where they want all these really large high-rise density within 400 meters. So if an LMR area falls within that TOD precinct, when you turn on the overlay, well, then only the TOD controls are applicable. You can't use the LMR controls there. If you're on the outskirts of, let's say, or the perimeter or just outside of the TOD and your LMR area, I guess, goes over or touches on those TOD areas, then yes, you can apply the LMR controls to those precincts. So I know that there's quite a few in the North Shore train stations where the TOD is smack there, and then the LMR also goes over it, but around it. So you'll be able to do LMR around it, but not within the TOD precinct itself.
Okay.
Sajeev, do you have another questions, or was that your hand from last time? Okay, I'm going to lower his hand.
Lower it.
Oh, cool. All right, let's move on. So, high aircraft noise area, ANEF. So I was able to source a map that prop code, which is, I guess, none of these data platforms has shared online. But again, this is just an indicative. I would ask you to do more research on this with your town planner. So you can see in this example here that they've provided the grey areas are the LMR areas, or we can do the LMR controls. In red, you can see it directly correlates to the aircraft, I guess, landing or descent line, whatever they call it, for aircrafts going into Port Botany, into the Sydney airport. You can see where it's highlighted in red on the left. It correlates back to where the planes are coming to take off or on as they're going to Sydney airport. So if your site that you're looking at is at contour level 20 or above, LMR is prohibited. If you're below the 20 contour line, then LMR is permitted. So I know that there's a number of platforms out there that show indicative contour lines. Sometimes when you get a survey of a property, those contour lines may not necessarily exactly align to those platforms like ArchiStar or Landchecker and so forth. So if you've got a site that you're looking at in that precinct and you're really on the nice edge of that 20, then you might want to get a survey done before committing to anything. If you're well below it, then you're fine. But again, you just have to ask yourself, do I want to take that risk? So the next one, which was an interesting one, I had to do a bit of digging on this. So they're saying that you can't do the LMR developments within 200-meter radius of one of these high-pressure pipelines. So the high-pressure pipelines are fuel, gas, and other types of sort of liquids and materials. What I was able to source was under the Transport and Infrastructure SEPP 2021. They have issued licenses from 1 to 35 plus 42. And you can see they've issued licenses to pipeline operators, and they only tell you in which local governments these pipelines run, underground or over. They don't tell you exactly where the location is. So this is a bit of an unknown. What happens here is you might be able to get it through a dial before you dig, or dig before you dial, whatever they call it now. And it might tell you if you can draw a radius around the site that you're looking at. I don't know if that's going to be reliable or not. The reason why they don't publish the physical maps, I inquired through the transport infrastructure area, is because there's security risks publishing this information. So they don't want to show where there's high flammable liquids running or other types of materials that they're running through these large pipelines. So it's all hidden information at this stage, so I can't get access to it. But what I understand is that the councils themselves that have a pipeline that you can see listed here do know the locations. So what I suggest is if you're going to have a pre-lodgement meeting with council and you're unsure if you're affected, well, then in that pre-lodgement meeting, you need to ask the question, am I affected by these pipelines? Because if you are, they'll be able to tell you yes or no. So then you know that you're not going to bother going forward. Or if you don't do that and you just lodge your DA application, what's likely going to happen is, and there's in the SEPP, there's instructions that the consent authority must then submit it to the relevant authority, your development application, if it's within the 200 meters, within 7 days of receiving it. So then they will determine whether you're going to be within that 200 meters or not if the council can't answer the question for you. And then they'll respond back to council. Most likely councils already know, and they'll give you that information early on, so then you won't proceed going forward because you don't want to waste your time or the council's time. So if they say they don't know it's pretty stupid of them because it's listed under the SEPP. You can see that local government areas and which particular operator is running a pipeline. You can see Caltex is running pipelines, Gemini Gas, Caltex. I was reading quite a few pipelines are running like jet fuel from the refineries in Port Botany over to the airport or other locations. So there's a lot of things happening underground that we don't know of. Any questions? Even for me, this is a bit of an unknown.
So how would you structure that into a DD or something like that if you were like trying to option sites?
If you're trying to option a site, then yes, you get a DD period, my recommendation. And then you have a quick pre-lodgement meeting for $600 or $800 with council. Go in there with some concepts drawn, even if it's yourself. Make it look a little bit professional and ask the question. You might be able to ask the planning team in an email without going to a pre-lodgement and say, hey, I'm looking at purchasing this property. My intent is to do this. I understand under the LMR rules, there's restrictions for a pipeline. I can see that under the Transport Infrastructure SEPP that your local government has a particular pipe operated by Caltex, license number 12. Can you please tell me if this property is impacted by it within 200 meters? I feel like if you ask that question very clearly in an email to them, I think you can get the right answer. You might not need to go to a pre-lodgement meeting. If you can show that you've done the research for them and you've pointed out which particular pipe shows that it's running in which particular council, and you want to know if your physical site that you're looking at is going to be impacted, they have a duty of care, I reckon, to inform you yes or no. Hani.
Yeah, Jihan, just a question about the new airport. That hasn't been considered yet, right?
Yes, it has.
It has, is it?
Yeah, I think it's on one of these listed LGAs because they would have built the infrastructure ahead of time with all the pipelines because they're going to have to transport jet fuel there.
Yep.
So they would have thought about this many years ago.
Sure. Okay.
It's not like I don't think they're going to be using trucks to bring in jet fuel. I don't think so.
No. even the aircraft noise as well, the contour line. That's to be affecting the area. Yep.
So in this aircraft noise, in this example, I only use Port Botany mascot, but there is Bankstown Airport and there is also the new Badgerys Creek Airport. So if you've got an LMO area that you're looking for there, just consider those other two smaller airports.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Cihan, can you hear me?
Yes.
They are actually trucking in jet fuel to their new airport. They haven't built pipeline infrastructure. I know that because it's come up on our latest risk mapping that we've done for our through work. So yeah.
Maybe it's in the works. Geez, all of that toxic fumes from the trucks.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, anyway. Cool, we'll move on to the next one. So this is the one that I want to spend a little bit of time on. Oh, sorry, Peter, do you have a question?
Not a question, but probably a comment. I think we all should have like a checklist to go through before we do anything. So don't think, it's LMR, yeah, go ahead and buy it. Just go through the steps and just check off everything, yeah? I think it's best.
Well, you could essentially say, hey, this presentation that I'll share in a PDF format is like a cheat sheet.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So you ain't going, geez, I'm going to buy another one, buy a site tomorrow or something. Anyway, it's a bit scary.
Cool. So, look, I'm going to spend a bit of time on this because it came up earlier and it's important. So, you got what I mentioned, step one, the LMR controls. Yes, cool. You tick and flick everything of those. Yes, I'm cool. I can adhere to those. But there is a relationship down at council level as well with the DCP controls. So the design control plans. And again, every council has different design control plans because they want to set a particular character for the area. Some councils aren't ready for this. So their design control plans might be a little bit old, or might ask for overstated setbacks or private open spaces, which then will impact an LMR design because you have to adhere to that if you can't get a variation forward. So the state government's pass this through, but we still have to then adhere to council levels. And this is where I think councils are going to be pushing back a little. And it comes back to the point made by Hani earlier around driveways and other items. So, for example, front, side, and rear setbacks, they weren't stated in the LMR level controls, so you have to adhere to those at the DCP level. Private open space and privacy, again, at DCP level. Now, if you're doing a dual lock or multi-res, it's pretty straightforward because most councils already sort of have that typology adapted into their DCPs of some sort. And they've already got some relevant controls that are pretty straightforward or very similar to like CDC types of controls. So I feel like if you're doing a dual lock multi-res, you should be fine. When it comes to when you're looking at residential flat buildings, well, a lot of councils never permitted residential flat buildings, let's say in R3 areas or R2 areas. So they don't have specific controls for those particular zones. But they do sometimes have controls for residential flat buildings overall across the entire council, but that was always with the frame of mind of R4 areas where they want that extra density. So sometimes those controls aren't fit for purpose for what the state government wants to achieve, which is these beautiful boutique, low-rise sort of apartment complexes. Because the mindset of some of the councils has always been, hey, 1,800 square meters or 4,000 square meters, you build these large complexes over 20 stories or 10 stories, but the low-rise or this reform, they want stuff to be built at 4 stories or 6 stories maximum. So this is where I feel like there's going to be, I would say, a bit of grey area with councils that you need to work through. And this is why I think it's important to do a pre-lodgement with some concepts, because I think there's going to be some negotiating there that you need to do with council. Rather than just forcing an application, have a constructive conversation first. So I feel that it's going to be pretty challenging for residential flat buildings. And I know this because I've got a site that falls within the LMR, and I had a DA approved on it for 4 terraces, and now it's residential flat building zone. So I'm just getting town to plan to qualify everything, dot I's and cross T's on it before I jump ahead to design stage. But I'm finding that some of the controls set at council level are going to really restrict the design. So then we have to really understand the relationship of what the state government wanted to achieve out of this strategy for the long term, and really educate the councils, because they're going to have to start to adapt and reduce some of these ridiculous setbacks that I've seen that are going to really limit the building envelope to like this little shoebox where naturally it should be much larger. So if you're considering developing residential flat buildings, most councils will have design control plans for residential flat buildings, but sometimes they also refer to what's called the ADG, so Apartment Design Guide. So they sometimes use a mix of both. So New South Wales set some standards and they call it the ADG, Apartment Design Guide. So if the councils don't have a specific control, well, then you're likely to need to use the ADG control. But if council does have a DCP control, then it's likely that they're going to enforce their own control. Some councils use a blend of both, or some councils will just adhere to the ADG guidelines, or some councils might be very generous because the ADG controls are just, I don't know, I would say too far stretched in some areas. So it's going to be pretty, I guess, complex to deal with, and it's going to be a case by case. And this is why I prefaced at the beginning, you got to speak to a town planner early and really position yourself properly, because you might find the site, yeah, cool, I can do a residential flat building, but that council might be enforcing some ridiculous site setbacks under their old residential flat or their current residential flat building controls. So it means that your buildable envelope is like really narrow and small. So it just comes back to, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So councils never permitted residential flat buildings in some areas in R2 and R3. So this is all new to them. So to enforce these ridiculous controls, which they've always designed for these larger multi-complexes, is not really going to be fit for purpose for what the state government wants to achieve here. So it's a bit of a grey area at the moment, and I'm trying to get some clarification. Now, I reckon councils are going to be really strict because a lot of them said, hey, we don't want these controls to come in. You're forcing this on us. And they're telling their constituents publicly that we now have to adhere to these strict rules by the state government. And, you know, councillors are elected by the constituents. So they're trying to show, you know, to their constituents, hey, we're being forced to do this. So we're being forced to comply with this extra density. You might not like it, but it's out of our hands. It was a state government initiative. So I reckon that we're going to get quite a few councils really pushing back on every point of clarification on the designs. And some councils are going to be lenient. And I reckon some councils are going to be so strict that they're going to use everything they can to throw at this to try and stop an LMR application or be super difficult. And that's where it's likely to go to Land Environment Court in a lot of cases. I think until councils start to see we're losing these cases, potentially, and that's where they might start to go, well, okay, we've got to change our attitude. So in this illustration, you can see here, this is a bit of a hybrid approach. You can see in these setbacks, in this example, council has DCP controls, but they also then adhere to some ADG controls, Apartment Design Guide. So it can get complex, and that's why it's always best to get town planning advice specific to your site and to your council if you're looking at residential flat buildings, because I think this is going to catch a lot of people out. I think a point that I really want to make is, let's just say I'll use one council, for example. Typically, they've only allowed residential flat buildings in R4s, and they had a minimum lot size of 1,800 square meters. And in a particular precinct, they required or mandated, I think it was close to 4,000 square meters to do residential flat buildings. Now that area is LMR activated. So that means all of these lots, individual lots, don't need to be consolidated anymore because you can achieve residential flat buildings up to 4 or 6 story high, versus the council originally wanted only 1,800 square meters or minimum 4,000, depending on the precinct. Now, typically, a lot of these sites are anywhere from 22 to 24 meters in width, and they're 900 square meters. So technically, you can do a small residential flat building on them. But this particular council enforces 6 meter setbacks on each side. So imagine you've got 24 meters of frontage, you have to give up 6 meters on each side. What do you got left with? 12 meters in the middle that's going to be really narrow and ugly looking. If council want to be real dicks about it, sorry to use that language, they're probably going to push that agenda. So I guess we just got to keep an eye out for this. Now, then you got to ask yourself the question, well, can I achieve a good product in that little narrow 12 meters? Yes, I can go deep into the site, but I've got 12 meters because I need to give those ridiculous setbacks. Well, then how many apartments can I face the street? Probably only 2. The rest of them all have to face the side. And then you've got privacy issues because they all have to face the side into the side neighbors. So again, think about what you're trying to achieve, what's plausible for the area, and then try and find sites that, I guess, fit the right strategy. Because in this example, council always intended 2 people at a minimum to amalgamate their 24 meter frontages into 48, and they would give up 6 meters and 6 meters. That gives them 36 meters of width to build a nice building and still be generous on the sides. But if they're now pushing LMR, or people are pushing LMR, you know, what are you going to achieve in 12 meters of width? You might have this really narrow lot, which looks nice in Bondi, but might not look nice in sort of these more greener areas. So I just want to leave that there for you guys to really think about, because it's not just because you can, you also have to adhere to the council's rules because there's a relationship with their local plans. Now, the last thing is, because they're restricting you on how much width you can actually use on the site, that might mean that you can't even achieve the full FSR of 1.5 or 2.2 because your building envelope is so small, because they've got these restrictive setbacks, which were originally designed for these larger apartment complexes where you had to amalgamate sites. They haven't given any thought, because they never needed to, for LMR, smaller stuff. It's likely that some of the councils, like let's say, in the eastern suburbs, where they've had predominantly smaller complexes built because they've allowed that, their setbacks probably aren't as generous. They're probably quite tight. So you can still achieve the best outcome. But some of these sort of outer suburbs, where now they've been activated, you're going to have these ridiculous setbacks, which I think is going to be a bit of a challenge. And again, there's nothing yet to, I guess, guide us on which controls councils are going to push. There was a lot to take in. So questions? Hanny.
Yeah, Jahan, just a question. Can we use another state rules like affordable housing SEPP, for example, with LMR for residential flat building sites?
I've got a site that talks exactly to that. So I'll defer the question. Yes, you can, and I'll get into the details around that.
Okay.
I think it's 2 slides away. Stan.
Details with the drawings of, CC drawings, is that still going to be like the same class 2, exactly the same as you would build a residential flat building?
So
and the cost involved as well?
Residential flat buildings technically fall under class 2. So you'd have to adhere to the rules of a class 2 building because there's common facilities, there's class 2 requirements. You'll need a facade engineer, you'll need, fire consultants, all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So it's not your traditional consultants that you'd likely use on a Duloc or a terrace development. You're going to need some real specialist types of consultants. And let me tell you, I've seen their costs. They're going to charge an arm and a leg because some of them specialize in it. They're taking in a lot of risk. And with class 2 buildings, a lot of risk. And with that risk is associated with a higher price point that you've got to pay for them.
But because these most likely will end up being like 4 or 6 apartments, 8 apartments, the cost is not going to be spread across so many apartments. As you would, like example, you said 1,800 square meter blocks or something like that. That's a lot more apartments to spread that cost over. With these ones, much LMRs, much smaller blocks. So you still use the same consultants and their charge rates will be that of a class 2 anyway. And something to consider.
Yeah, I can't really comment on that. But if you think about it, let's just say you've got 1,000 square meters and you're in the outer ring of 1.5, you can get 1,500 square meters. As long as you can fill it within the building envelope, within your side setbacks, and vertically as well within the height limit, you've got 1,500 internal. That does include your external balcony areas. So that's your gyprock walls. But your actual building needs to fit within the building envelope. So if you're using concrete or brick, that has to be on the perimeter of your setbacks, but the FSR is measured internally. So FSR, and again, don't quote me on this, FSR calculations include internal habitable spaces. So if you've got a void, then it's not included, that second level section of the void. Obviously the bottom floor, because it's trafficable, it is. And a staircase. So if you've got a staircase, the ground level of that staircase is included, but the void above it, when you're going up to the second level or third level, is then clear of FSR from my understanding. But when you're doing a residential flat building, you've got corridors. That's an enclosed space, so that's considered as part of your FSR from my understanding. So you might have 1,500 square meters, but you then also have to allow for wastage. So if you've got a good architect that knows how to design those common areas well and really limit the common area space, because then you can add it back to the sellable floor space of the actual apartments, you really want to focus on that. Cool. Let's go to the next question. Oh, sorry, to the next slide. So what I discovered was just before the LMR reforms were released, I noticed a new design guide that was published. And you can see I've highlighted in red, it's called Design Guide for Development Applications. They only ever had a design guide, from my understanding, of the Complied Development Code when you're doing a CDC. And you can see here, there's a little notation. It says there that this guide is there to guide councils that previously, I guess, never permitted dulocs or terraces in these new LMR areas potentially. And because they haven't yet set up their DCP controls for those areas that they're now being, I guess, that have been flagged as LMR, it looks like they've published this design guide, which is very similar controls. When I've had a look side by side to the CDC, there is some variations to allow and facilitate development applications through the LMR process in those local areas that never traditionally allowed terraces or dulocks in particular zones. So it looks like they anticipated this, because we do know that there are still some councils working and updating their DCPs. So while they're doing that, it appears, and again, don't quote me, that this guide is here to help you as a developer and councils for a set of minimum standards to achieve while a council adopts a DCP. Some councils might not adopt a DCP for dulocks or terraces and might just say, hey, we adhere to this design guide on the New South Wales planning website. I would qualify it with your town planner architect to make sure that this is the guide that you should be using in terms of setbacks, private open space, etc. If a council doesn't have DCP controls for the typology of the type of development that you're trying to achieve in an area. Now, last year, they invited a number of architects to submit applications for a design pattern book. So what is a design pattern book? There's a number of architects that submitted for low-rise buildings, so dulocks, multi-res, and terraces, and a number of architects that were awarded for the the residential flat buildings, shop-top housing. So what the state government's trying to encourage is more standardized designs, so you can have a fast-track process through council. So these architects are going to come up with a pattern book of designs that you could plock onto your site. You'll have some ability to make some standard variations to it or changes to it to adjust or fit, but they're going to be restricted from what I understand. But that is like a copy paste. So you pluck that on there and you likely go through a fast track process, and councils are going to be forced to accept that and adopt that as part of a DA process. So you're saving money on architects' fees, consultants' fees, and so forth. And you've got more of a predicted cost of the product, because you can then send that or give that to the builder of your choice and say, hey, I'm going to apply to have this particular pattern design on my site. What would it cost to build? So they're just trying to get things fast-tracked. And that's what the intent is. So this is going to be published at mid to late 2025, they said. And I actually spoke to one of the architects directly on this that I met at an event, and they're doing residential flat buildings. He wouldn't give me a lot of detail because obviously he's bound by, I guess, some contracts that he had to sign and can't release too much information. But what he indicated to me in some strategic words is, if you adopt one of these designs and it fits or plucks on with some minor variation, councils can't refuse your application. So then this tells me that they're potentially going to set some new minimum standards, or maybe update the apartment design guide later on. Because if the design pattern book comes out and it already has set controls and a specific design that you pluck onto a site, it's sort of telling me that, well, then they need to adapt the old apartment design guide where it has ridiculous setbacks to maybe adapt to this low mid-rise pattern book designs as well. So I think there's going to be some correlation. Don't quote me on it because the details haven't come out yet. I guess when they're published, I think we'll know a lot more. Any questions? Tinker.
Sorry, just want to ask, like, right now, say the pattern book will be released in mid 2025?
Mid to late 2025, they're published on Department of Planning's website.
Mid to late. Okay, got it.
Yep. Cool. Next slide. So affordable housing, back to Hanny's question. So the state government does want to encourage affordable housing. So under the Housing SEPP, under Chapter 2, Division 6, I've sourced you're permitted to apply and demonstrate affordable housing in your development application. And you can get a bonus FSR uplift and a bonus height uplift as well if you dedicate some of the lots that you're creating to a 15-year holding cycle. So the developer will develop some products, will hold on to them for 15 years because they'll be flagged on title as affordable housing. And the way the affordable housing works is that it needs to be given to a registered provider to then market those apartments or products to people that need it in an area. So it's not lower socio-eco, demographic. It's people that, let's say, they're police officers or firefighters or teachers that don't have, the means to afford the high rent in some areas, but need to be located nearby. They get a rent reduction. From my understanding, it's 80% of the market rate, and it's administered by this non-profit organization. So there's quite a few of them registered. And what it does is it gives us as developers, again, if you're thinking of retaining some stock because you've developed enough, and if you're considering that, well, then consider, well, okay, what is it going to cost me to add the additional affordable housing? You're likely going to design those apartments of similar quality and character to the same other products that you're creating. And if your intent is to keep it for 15 years, well, I say it's a no-brainer, man. Why not? You keep some stock, you lease it out, yes, at 80% of market rate, which isn't still too bad. And in 15 years' time, if you wanted to sell it, you can. Or take it off affordable housing and then rent it on the open market, you can. So if you give up 10% of your gross floor area, you can get a 20% FSR uplift. If you give up 15% of your gross floor area to affordable housing stock, they give you a 30% FSR bonus uplift. And they also give you 20% height increase and also 30% height increase, depending on what you're dedicating back to affordable housing. Pretty straightforward. Now, what I've done is I've done an example here because it's easier to explain in the table. So let's say you've got 1,000 square meters and you're, let's say, in the outer ring and you're going to do residential flat building. Well, you're getting 1.5 FSR and you're getting 17.5 height limit. So if you're just doing without affordable housing, cool, you got 1,500 square meters to play with. If you want to give up 10% of your overall floor space, well, then you can have 20% bonus FSR and 20% bonus height. So then your FSR is going to go up overall to 1.8. So you're going to get an extra 300 square meters of uplift. Now, in that 300 square meters, you only have to give up 180 square meters to affordable housing. And you're going to pick yourself up 2 extra, let's say, 1-bedroom apartments or 1 2-bedroom apartment, 120 square meters to bank for yourself. Does those numbers make sense? If you're going to give up 15% of your floor space, you're going to go up to 1.95 FSR. You're going to go up to 22.7 in height. So your total uplift is 450 square meters. You only then have to give up mathematically 293 to affordable housing, or dedicate to affordable housing, not give up, sorry, because you still own it. It's still a quality asset. And you're getting bonus outside of affordable housing, 157 square meters. So imagine if it's costing you, let's say, $700,000 to build an apartment, but that apartment's worth 1.5 million or 1.4 million, they're giving you bonus FSR to use to create some extra profit in a project. Yes, some of it you have to retain for 15 years. Why not? And then some of it you can sell because you've got that extra uplift that isn't technically part of your affordable housing, because the calculation says you only need to give up 10 or 15%. I'll pause there. Any questions? Tinker? Oh, okay. Rex.
Just a quick one. So this FSR uplift for the affordable housing, is that available to R2 zone sites as well?
If you're within the LMR,
Yeah.
sorry, one thing I need to touch on. So you got the LMR, which is up to 800.
Yeah.
But under the Affordable Housing Code, you need to demonstrate that your physical site is within 400 meters of walking distance to public transport that has a direct and frequent connection to major retail or commercial sites or a commercial center. So if you're in the 800, let's say you're within the 700
yeah.
to your shopping precinct,
Yeah.
and you have no public transport like a bus stop or a train within 400 meters, unfortunately, based on my understanding, you won't qualify for affordable housing uplift. So not only do you need to demonstrate that you can walk to that town centre or train station within the LMR precinct, you also then need to demonstrate that you can walk within, again, the walking distance definition, that a safe point-to-point route within 400 meters of transport that can take you to a major retail or commercial center like a shopping center.
Because including a bus stop, it doesn't matter how frequent it is.
Yes, well, there needs to be a frequent connection, and there are some technical definitions of how frequent it needs to be and the time of frequency, because it's designed to give people who can't afford a car access to get into some transport that can service them to get to their groceries or get to the doctor and so forth.
And just a follow-up question, and I'll shut up after that.
Oh, good.
Is that, so if you have retirees that are looking to downsize, and it's probably a question I should just Google, but does that mean that they're eligible? So if you've got a lot of retirees wanting to build they want to live in the area, and they're not retired police officers or nurses or doctors, but they've got family in the area, is that, like, what's the definition of a someone who's eligible, who is potentially a client for that?
If you read through chapter 2 in the Housing SEPP 2021, it clearly defines who would be eligible and who is not eligible. I haven't gone into that detail because it's quite technical.
Thank you.
There is minimum criteria. So there's I think detail around income. There's household income or individual income, and there's other eligibility categories.
It's like pensioners. There's a lot of pensioners who want to live in the same area, but they don't want to move out and they can't afford it to buy, $2 million house. Thanks. Thank you.
So what you do is you offer them a joint venture and give them a product or two.
That's exactly right.
Stan Lee.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked at affordable housing as a way of keeping and as a wealth building strategy. It's good that you mentioned it. But the other thing is, how valuers look at this? Do they, discount it more because you've got these extra apartments and FSR through affordable housing? I've just never thought how valuers would actually. It's very easy to calculate. It's all gone on market and it's all sold tomorrow. But how do valuers hold? You got a whole sum, and some has got to go to different categories. Have you ever had that before?
Yep, so I can answer pretty much the question. I've got to do a little bit more research on this because I don't know if you can technically sell the affordable housing product that you created. I think the developer has to keep it, but don't quote me on that. So there is that aspect, which I just need to qualify because I haven't looked that deep into it. If you can't sell it and you as a developer have to keep it, well, the valuer is not going to value it because you're likely going to keep that product because it's part of your profit. So it'll be likely unencumbered depending on how many you're creating and your strategy. So I'll give you a scenario. If you're creating 6, as Rob teaches us, that sixth one is your profit or 20%. If affordable housing is giving you, let's say, 8, you're getting an extra 2 and you have to dedicate those 2, well, then you're likely going to have 2, possibly roughly a 2.5 of the products that you're creating out of the 8 likely to be unencumbered. So the question then is, am I going to revalue that and try and get some equity out? As a smart developer, you might. But again, everyone's circumstance is different. If you are, the valuer is going to value it based on what is flagged on title, and it will be flagged on title as an affordable housing unit. But Stan, if you're creating a product that is consistent with the rest of the building, I heard from a valuer that they only value it roughly 5 to 10% down from, let's say, another identical unit in a block. So if your apartments are worth 1.5 everywhere else, but the affordable one, well, they're likely going to value it at, let's say, 1.35 for argument's sake. That's for 15 years. So it'll always have that on title as affordable housing 15 years, but after the 15 years, well, then it just becomes normal stock in the market. So that's just all around your strategy. And I'm not here to tell you what you should do or don't do. You just got to think about some of these awesome opportunities if you're within the 400 walkability of, let's say, a transport that can take you to one of those major retail. And if you're creating stock that is consistent with the rest of the building, and you're not having, let's say, people from, I won't actually, I'll remove myself from saying something bad because there's a recording. But let's say you've got lower socio-eco people, then it's not designed for those types of people. So it's designed for people that are working, that have a healthy income, and they're good, upstanding citizens. So the building's going to look no different. The people in that building are going to experience nothing different. In fact, they're probably going to be benefiting because they might have teachers or police officers or firemen in the building that can contribute to the area. So it's not like they're going to get people from social housing and chuck them into this from areas of Sydney. That's social housing that's operated separately by the state. This is just affordable housing. And there's criteria to meet. Cool. No other questions? That's pretty much the presentation. So when I share this, you can see that I've got all the links. So don't worry, once you click on them, they'll go to all the relevant areas where I've referenced my material. So everything's all been sourced and I guess just translated in my language. And any other questions, Alex?
Thanks, Cihan. Great presentation. Yeah, just about the affordable housing, I noticed obviously you were talking about the 400 meters walking distance. Is it still applicable in the 400 to 800 meter? Unless I may have missed that if that was answered already.
Yep, I did give an example. So you've got your, let me just scroll through to an image. So see how you got a 400 ring, which is the inner ring, and then you got your 800 ring, which is your outer ring. It doesn't matter where your property is located in this LMR 800. You just need to demonstrate that you can walk from your property within 400 meters to transport that can transport those people living in affordable housing to an economic area like shops or health, because they may not necessarily be able to walk the entire 800 meters. So we do have large bus networks. We do have large transport networks. So I would say that you would likely find that you could demonstrate on quite a few LMR areas walkability within 400 meters to, let's say, a local bus stop. But in some areas, you may not be able to, depending on how far infrastructure is spaced out.
Yeah, excellent. That's a good answer. Thanks, Cihan.
So not only are you trying to demonstrate walkability to the locations to qualify for LMR, but then if you want the affordable housing uplift, look around at all of the transport and where does it take you and the frequency that's required under the affordable housing SEPP, and then demonstrate again with the same walking distance like this, and your town planner will already know about this because they'll need to demonstrate it to qualify. And then if you can demonstrate that you're walking to a bus stop within 400 meters from your location, you're good to go.
Cool. Thank you.